Hey, Detoxers! Welcome to the Disinfo Detox. Last night, the Democratic Party is celebrating major victories in states like California, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and more. To help unpack what this means for the Democratic Party and the future of the United States, I am joined by award winning journalist, author, and broadcaster Sonali Kolhatkar. Welcome to the Disinfo Detox.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a real pleasure. Obviously, been a long time listener and had the privilege of being on your program. So this is cool to get to chat again.
Yeah.
Last night was a pretty good night. We saw Democrats, whether it's the further left side of the party, the center, or even the right conservative side of the party, all sort of celebrating. Uh, what did you make of last night, the election?
It was definitely a celebration when it came to New York City. Zohran Mamdani's win was widely expected, and still it was kind of remarkable to see it unfold. I've been following his race for months. I actually tried to interview him this past spring. I'm here in LA, and I know he's focusing mostly on New York media. And I could tell right from the start that this was a campaign that we had to pay attention to. And I remember the moment that it really felt exciting was when I watched his his political ad that he recorded entirely in Hindi to get the South Asian vote out um, in New York during his primary race. And I was so impressed by that, by the fact that he has such clear bread and butter issues that are economic justice issues, and he leans into his policy positions so eloquently, so clearly. He doesn't shy away from them. He's very clear about his political identity, and he's very clear about his national, ethnic, racial identity, religious identity. And that, I think, is such a wonderful, powerful, winning combination, because we've been told for such a long time by various factions on the liberal end of the spectrum, on the right wing end of the spectrum, and even among progressives, okay, you should vote, or you should focus on bread and butter economic issues and downplay your racial identity or your background. Or, from the right, you don't play up the economic justice issues, only play up the demographic issues. And of course, we are all complex people, and we have intersecting identities, as does Zohran Mamdani. And I love that he didn't shy away from either of them, because his candidacy sends a really strong message that we are a rapidly diversifying nation that desperately needs a redistribution of wealth from the top echelons to the bottom. And you can have both. And the fact that he was able to energize people of all backgrounds, all faiths, young men went hard for Zoran. This was the demographic that people were most worried about going towards Trump. And it really shows what's possible. And, a lot of people are going to try to say, well, you can't repeat this in other cities because New York City is very unique and he was facing this corrupt politician with a record. But that's not true. New York City is, because it's so diverse. And the fact that he was able to capture the vote, not just because of its racial diversity, but because of its political diversity, that shows that it's possible everywhere. And so I hope I want to see his campaign be the model now, because he ran a once in a generation campaign, and it really should be a model for how democratic socialists and leftists and progressives run campaigns to win power.
Yeah, and I don't mean to overstate this, but because I think Mom Donnie went really hard in the direction that you just described. But at least when I was watching, particularly some of the speeches in New Jersey and even a little bit here in California, I started to see some of even like the centrist Democrats kind of making that connection, where I heard the word affordability a lot more connected to some of these issues. What do you kind of make of that? I mean, do you think the party is starting to realize that kind of shutting out that Bernie AOC wing was a disaster, and they're trying to find a productive way to meld it? Do you think Mom Donnie forced him in that direction? What's your kind of take on that?
Definitely, I think Mamdani pushed it, and he himself traces his sort of political lineage to Bernie Sanders and Bernie Sanders' campaign, and Sanders' campaign traces its political lineage to the Occupy Wall Street movement. There is a direct line, and I think that's really powerful. But also, I think this might not be getting as much attention. The person who brought up affordability issues most recently and in a most high profile way was Donald Trump. We had a right wing populist talk about not being able to people not being able to afford groceries. Why do we think he won in 2024, right? Of course, his solution, doesn't have a solution. And if he did, it would be favoring the rich because he is a master of propaganda. He's a cult leader. But the fact that by focusing on affordability, he could win was also, I think, I hope, something that the centrist Democrats took away and realizing that they do need to focus on it. They can't just focus on superficial issues. This idea that if you can basically have a big tent politics, like the political pundits love the big tent politics, which is essentially another way of saying, let's stand for everything, which means you stand for nothing. They've realized that that is, I hope, a losing strategy. So between Mamdani and Trump, the most obvious lesson is you have to focus on affordability issues, and then you actually have to give real solutions. And when you have complex sounding solutions, you can actually talk about them in ways that are really simple. People are comparing Mamdani to Obama, which I think is a terribly unfair comparison to Mamdani. Obama, yeah, was very inspiring, but he was never defiant in the way Mamdani is. And his victory speech last night, where he was like, turn the volume up, is what he told Trump. And Obama was not specific. He was really vague. He had a lot of platitudes. He was the perfect blank slate for progressives and centrists to project their wildest fantasies onto. And he took great advantage of that and won, and then delivered things that were just not enough for either side. And so he also didn't really enjoy leaning into his racial identity. I mean, he did it in he code switched in very certain specific arenas and contexts, but not in a, he pulled back when he was facing a multiracial audience. And so, yeah, I think you can be very, very clear and specific, because everybody who's followed Mamdani's campaign knows that he's about city run grocery stores, universal childcare, fast and free buses, rent control. They can count and articulate his policy positions on their hand, which is amazing. Also, anti genocide, being really clear. He would arrest Netanyahu if he stepped on in New York City. It's amazing.
Yeah, and let's talk about the defiance, because this is connects to something I've found interesting. And just the night before the election, it was announced that former Vice President Dick Cheney died. And I know Democrats, critiques of Trump, especially during his first term and once he was out of office, they complained a lot about the erosion of norms. Right, this was like a big fixation of theirs about how we've gotten rid of norms. And with Dick Cheney's passing, there was some debate. I saw cable news seemed to go the traditional normal route with how they talked about Dick Cheney. It's all just positive, remembering what they see as the positives of his career. In the digital space, there was kind of a mix of some people making critiques, others saying, if you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. And in the center to me, it was kind of this battle over norms. And I bring it up in the context of Mamdani because there was quite at least in my estimation, a shocking moment on CNN last night, which is the one commentator I didn't really expect to kind of immediately attack Mamdani was Van Jones. And maybe I'm naive about that. But as soon as Mamdani's speech ended, Van Jones, rather than being kind of electrified by this progressive speech in New York City and this massive victory by a young person who's electrifying the audience, immediately talked about how he was complaining how Mamdani didn't give into the norms. He shouldn't have been defiant. He should have been positive. He shouldn't have talked that way to Trump. He shouldn't have talked that way about Andrew Cuomo. What do you make of that analysis and sort of this fixation on norms?
Van Jones is the absolute, I was not surprised. Let's put it that way. Van Jones has over and over and over shown that he is willing to say what he thinks needs to be said to be heard. He does not have a strong set of values. He's someone who, I don't know, maybe a decade or more ago might have been a progressive political commentator. He's an absolute sellout, and I don't think he's worth listening to in this moment. I put him in the same category as Ezra Klein, for that matter. One of these so called political pundits who our electorate is now very clearly saying, shut up and sit down, right? Because what you have to say has so little basis in the lived experiences of people's day to day lives. If we are not defiant about the fact that the 1% has screwed us over, if we are not very clear about the battle lines of the class war that the rich is waging against us, we are going to lose, because we have been losing. The Democrats have over and over again shied away from being defiant and lost. Right? Kamala Harris couldn't, a party that couldn't have a nominee that could stand up for genocide. This has been said by others before. If you can't draw the line at genocide, how can you draw the line at saving democracy and against fascism? So if Van Jones sees those boundaries, those so-called norms, as more important. It's like, let's civility is more important than values. If civility is more important than values, then you don't belong in this political moment.
Yeah, and let's talk about this political moment, because AOC was, all over cable news last night, as were many other people who are possible 2028 candidates. And so there was a lot of conversation about the 2026 midterms, but also the 2028 presidential race. And in the context of the Democrats, I thought there was kind of an interesting juxtaposition of the divide of the party in a couple different ways, but particularly as Mamdani's speech ended, and you had this sort of young, huge arena speech that really felt more like a rock concert, honestly, than a political event. Then it cut to California with who I think, the establishment really likes in the Democratic Party, Gavin Newsom. And there he was, kind of alone behind a banner, telling the rest of the party what to do, kind of acting like that traditional leader. And then, throughout the evening, we heard about, some of the governor's races and other things like that about the future of the party. Where do you kind of see the future of the party at this moment? I know it's really early to say that, but what did you kind of take away as far as the future of the party goes from last night?
Well, first, Proposition 50 was important only in the fact that it was meant to counteract the Trump agenda to take over the House by any means necessary. If Proposition 50 did not have language in it to say that it was an emergency temporary measure to have redistricting in California to combat Texas's cheating, I would have had a problem voting for it. But it was clearly stated as an emergency temporary measure, because the solution to gerrymandering is not more gerrymandering. The solution to gerrymandering is fairer districts. But if one side is going to play dirty, that's the one thing I appreciate about Gavin Newsom, is that he has shown some willingness to fight fire with fire. However, Gavin Newsom overall, to me, is the white male version of Kamala Harris. He is the quintessential pick me politician who looks at which way the political winds are blowing and has no problem throwing vulnerable communities under the bus if he thinks that is the way to get ahead. So I look at the political candidate's stance on transgender rights as a really good litmus test. This is a very tiny, very vulnerable, very marginalized community in the country. Transgender people are like a minuscule percentage of our population and have a minuscule impact on the day-to-day lives of most Americans, and have been turned into a boogeyman by the likes of Trump to, as scapegoats to rile people up. And when I see Democrats like Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom try to appease the right by throwing trans people under the bus, to me, that is an absolute litmus test failure. And then all you have to do is look at somebody like Zohran Mamdani, who campaigned alongside trans leaders in New York, who had the endorsement of prominent transgender leaders who paid homage to Stonewall, to make very clear he would not be willing to throw any marginalized community under the bus to get ahead. I want a I want to see more of the politician who finds what their values are and sticks to it, and less of the pick me politician, because the pick people can see through. People are politically savvy. They see the inauthenticity of people like Newsom and Harris, who are both itching to be on the 2028 scene, because they're desperation for power and higher office is so apparent that nobody is going to get fooled, and Kamala Harris will lose a second time if she runs, and with it, take the rest of us. So enough with her, enough with Gavin Newsom, enough with the Abigail Spanbergers, who, yes, she won the Virginia governor's race last night, but that's because she was the Democratic nominee. And in a field of Democratic nominees, if there was somebody running to her left, I wonder if Virginia would have not preferred a more progressive candidate, because she is the one who 2 years ago, no, 4 or 5 years ago, after Trump won in 2020, said we should never use the word socialism or socialist again because that's how the Democratic Party loses. Well, she was proved wrong in Mamdani's win last night.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention a couple of those other races, and I agree with you because Abigail Spanberger, governor elect in Virginia, that's a state that's been hit pretty hard by the shutdown and the Trump cuts as well. And I got to imagine that'd be pretty fertile ground for
Yeah,
someone further left to come in.
it's also ground zero for AI data centers. This is
Hmm.
something people don't really know that much about. We have such, Wall Street has thrown, and the Trump administration has thrown its weight behind AI startups and the AI industry. And to keep up with that, there are massive data centers being built in largely rural communities. And Virginia is ground zero there, like more data centers there than I think any other state in the country, that are consuming enormous amounts of energy and enormous amounts of water to cool down these data centers. And so, that is an issue that I think we really need. It's one of those issues that has the economic, a very clear economic line around who is considered important, people or corporations, rich people or poor people. And yeah, Virginia it remains to be seen what Spanberger's position on that will be.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's something we've talked about a lot on this program. That there's not just the environmental degradation, which is critically important, and you bring up rightly, but also a lot of these data centers get subsidies, and the cost of that electricity is passed on to the people who live close to them. There was a study that recently came out that over the last like 5 years, people have seen upwards of like 400% increases if you live close to these data centers. And again, I just feel like that's meat on the bone for someone further left to build a coalition around. But I'm not convinced Governor Abigail Spanberger is the right politician for that issue.
Agreed. And I think it's really, really important because I think last night a lot of folks were so energized by Mamdani's win that they are walking away saying, yay, we showed the centrist Democrats. But Spanberger also won. And it's going to be just a matter of time before the pundits come out and say, look, our big tent theory worked. We can be a party that can have Spanberger and Mamdani. And actually, no, that's not true, because in the end, when you have that kind of a coalition, the Spanbergers are going to beat out the Mamdanis, because every step of the way, folks like her stood it, not exactly her, but folks like her stood in his way, from Hakeem Jeffries to Cory Booker to, all of the, to Chuck Schumer, who refused to endorse him. They will not allow Mamdani to take up space within the party because they see him as an existential threat to them. So I think we have to be careful, and the left has to have their responses ready. And for us, this was one big test. The thing that Mamdani showed that Spanberger couldn't show was how to win back young male voters, how to win back Jewish voters, how to win back, how to win back Jewish voters while being anti-genocide, which I think is really, really important, and how to inspire young people as a whole to come out and vote. She wasn't able to do that. So that, I think we need to kind of narrowly focus on that aspect of it, which can have an impact everywhere else, because they're going to come out and say, no, the centrist wing is still alive, and really, frankly, that wing should die.
Yeah, and let's shift to another race here. Governor-elect Mikey Sherrill gave a talk last night, and I heard a speech or victory speech really seemed interesting to me. I saw her kind of pulling some of Mamdani and pulling some of like the Spamberger in the speech. She seemed to position herself in between. And what I mean by that was she had kind of the typical Democratic Party platitudes in the way she gave the speech. But she also pulled some from Mamdani. She gave a part of her speech where she named multiple cities and districts within New Jersey and said what she was going to do for each of them. And I thought that was kind of her speaking to that critique of Democrats that they're all, big city liberals who don't care about the whole state, only the big cities. What do you make of her candidacy and sort of her position?
I confess I've not studied that race as closely as I've studied the other races. However, the fact that she was influenced by Mamdani's rhetoric is shows the power of and the importance of Mamdani's candidacy more so than it shows that she's somebody that we should be paying close attention to, is willing to do and say the right thing. I'm more interested in how his candidacy is going to influence Democrats to tack further left than I am invested in the success of those candidates who are trying to go which way the political winds blow. It basically, I think they need to hear the message, either move to the left or get out of the party, because either have a clear plan for how you're going to, for what it is you stand for. And I think that was the other part of it. I noticed the messaging last night, just going back to Newsom, because I'm in California, I'm paying more attention to that. Newsom's takeaway from last night's victory was, look how we can win when we are anti-Trump. He had the word anti-Trump in some like social media post. Zohran Mamdani's nod to Trump was bring it on. But the majority of everything else he focused on was what he stood for, right? What does Newsom stand for? What does Abigail Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill stand for? And Sherrill definitely, had more of a articulation of that than Newsom or Spanberger, but that's what we need to be demanding from these folks. We know what Mamdani stands for over and over again. He's been hammering it in. And that is what I think so many progressives, and frankly, not just progressives, so many Americans are desperate for. They want politicians who stand for something and who are very clearly going to articulate, we want an end to the affordability crisis and here's our plan to do so. And enough, like, we don't need to hear wonkish speeches about tax credits and subsidies and means testing, and if you make below this level of the federal poverty line, then you will be eligible for 20%, and then if you make a no universal child care. Enough with the means testing. Let's have elegant solutions where it doesn't matter what your income is. If we can have universal pre-K through 12th grade public education, if we can have libraries where a one percenter or a person on the edge of poverty can walk into equally, then we can do the same for healthcare, for childcare, for all of these other for housing, for groceries. So having those nice, clean, elegant solutions that are universal, that articulate what it is that we stand for, as opposed to I'm against Trump. That's what we want, right? Kamala Harris ran an entire campaign on how she was against Trump. That same thing that Hillary Clinton did. Both of them lost. Biden only won because people were still fresh from Trump's insanity, I think. Was more complicated than that. He too Biden did near the end articulate the kinds of things that Sanders stood for. And I think that was a reason why he won, because he realized that he needed to do that. Anyway, I am going on, but yeah, I think we need to talk about what it is that we stand for.
Well, I think we just need to be patient. Once Gavin's team and pollsters tell him what he stands for, he'll let us know. But um, when it occurs to me that as you were kind of going through that history, connecting it back to the Sanders campaign and back to Occupy, and I know some folks have gone as far back as the Jesse Jackson campaign.
Yeah.
There's a lot of young people who are excited by Mamdani, just like there were young people who were excited by Bernie and Obama. But maybe they don't have that history, they don't have that context, they didn't live through those moments. What are some advice or things you think that maybe young folks should be cognizant of as we enter this era coming forward?
I think people should study his campaign and look at there are going to be a lot of breakdowns, a lot of analyses, a lot of post-mortems of his campaign, and those need to be applied not in a cookie cutter manner, but in a how can we adapt this to our locality or our candidate manner. I think the fact that he remained so closely connected to social movements is really, really important, because a lot of people are saying, oh my God, how is he going to enact his very ambitious agenda? It's because he's not going to do it by himself. Every step of the way, he reflected back what New Yorkers wanted, and he didn't have to, unlike Cuomo, pay canvassers to go knock on his doors. He's got an enormous volunteer army of people who believe in the agenda he articulated, as opposed to believing in him. Yes, there's some hero worship, and I would hope that eventually people sort of move away from that. But the fact is that there's this enormous excited electorate that's ready to help him enact his agenda in New York City. And I think we need to learn from that. For example, one of the reasons he won South Asian low income voters in New York City was because he put his own body on the line for New York City taxi drivers 1 year before he campaigned for mayor. This was when he was a state assemblyman, and he understood that cab drivers in New York City were struggling, were going bankrupt, were committing suicide because of their economic uh, problems. And he went on a hunger strike with them, literally went on a hunger strike for days with them, and helped them win concessions. They never forgot that. And that was the moment that the Daisy's Rising movement, which is a South Asian led grassroots organization, decided to endorse him. Working Families Party brought him on board. I mean, he was very clearly making the connection with the movements. He emerged from the movements. He is a product of these movements. So we need to, I think, see those people in our own communities who are active in movements and ready to run. In Los Angeles, we have a fantastic candidate who is challenging Democrat Jimmy Gomez. Her name is Angela Gonzalez Torres. She's a wonderful young activist local to our community. Unfortunately, I'm just outside her district, so I can't vote for her, but she's running for office. And I interviewed her, and she's leaning into, she's a Latina who wears a keffiyeh because she's anti genocide, and she is leaning into her background, her racial and identity, her gender identity, her local roots, her immigrant identity. Her father was a deportee. She was a daughter of an undocumented person who was deported. She's openly talking about that. And she's for economic justice issues, universal childcare, all of the things we need. So we're already seeing the Mamdani effect. I don't know if I shouldn't say Mamdani effect, because I think her candidacy predated that. But we're seeing maybe her candidacies like hers be emboldened more so, and maybe more people paying attention to her. Fatima Iqbal Zubair is another candidate in Southern California who is running for office. Maybe a girl is a wonderful candidate who is openly trans and running for Congress, challenging Adam Schiff, and is very, very, adopts democratic socialist policy platforms. I love that we're seeing this. And so these are people who are accountable to the movements. So, I think that we are on the cusp of a wonderfully positive, powerful wave of young people who are defying Democrats and Republicans. So take heart, people.
Sonali, always informative, inspiring, and interesting. Where can folks go to follow more of your work?
So I do solutions journalism. My point is that we need to cover what are the solutions to the world's and the nation's problems, and how are people already solving it. And you can find out all about my work at risingupwithsonali.com. It's a subscription-based Substack style website, and I do 2 to 3, actually 4 interviews a week. And if people subscribe, they can get access to all the audio, video content, transcripts, everything, and help keep independent journalists like me and Nolan and others alive. Because I just this week, I'm looking at the news at Teen Vogue, one of the most important political outlets that had become political in recent years, has now basically let go of all their political journalists. The corporate gatekeepers don't like journalists like me, so I really hope people do support the work that I do and the work that Nolan is doing.
Do it. Support it. Sonali, thank you so much for coming on the Disinfo Detox. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And thank you, detoxers. We'll see you next time.